You, my brother, and how are you?
Good afternoon, Dave. How are you? I'm good. I'm good. All is well. How are you?
I'm batting, rocking, and rolling with the punches as you have to do these days. It's a bunk to must have two thing. Well, Richard called me this morning and he said he'll be joining us. He's en route to Trinidad from Ireland, so I
Okay.
guess he'll be joining us before the program, before 6. Let's say before 6.
All right. All right.
What's up with you? So many things are happening. Before you get into the meat of the matter, I want to ask you a simple question that it's been bombarding me ever since. When
Yeah.
the policemen were charged for the murder of the three guys in Mova and stuff, right? Now,
Yeah.
normally when you are charged, is it at that point you cannot say things outside because at that point it's in the court, in front of the court? The moment you are charged or when you face the magistrate, it will be considered being in front of the court or being at court for this matter.
Once the charge has been laid, once the police have signed the charge documents and they have issued a what you would call a notice to prisoner
Uh-huh.
receipt to the officers, the eight
Yeah.
of them,
Yeah.
they don't have to appear in court. If that was given to them on Sunday night before court Monday morning, then they are now officially charged.
All right.
And it
Now the point.
offends the rules, the rule against the sub judice rule, which says that once a matter is before the court, then it ought not to be discussed. But it doesn't mean to say that you can't speak about the fact that something happened. What
Oh.
we cannot speak about is things that may be of evidential value that may feature at the
Oh.
trial.
Now
Because
the reason for me asking you that, Freed, is that I know what they talk about prejudicial and all this kind of thing, but I was listening to the welfare, the chief of the police welfare, and he was saying, when people die under the hands of the doctors, nobody this and nobody that. When certain people do things, you don't see them being handcuffed and stuff. You think that's prejudicial? That kind of talk?
the thing is, the police are very sensitive people. They have managed to, they have a wide discretionary powers that are handed down by way of legislation, like the Police Service Act and different acts that speak to what they can and cannot do.
Right.
And if you read the rubric and the wording of these provisions, it gives them a certain amount of latitude. Now, when it is they find themselves in a position where they must respond to public criticism, or they're in a position where they are being criticized in a public space, they take offense because by law, the same acts that govern their discretion and determine how widely they can act, the same law says that they cannot comment on a matter of public interest because as officers they must be neutral. So when it is an investigation is taking place or there are comments being made about the police, that's why you have a police communications unit. And Sheridan Hill, the communications officer, he's the man that responds.
Yeah.
So sometimes they take offense when people commenting in the public space about the 8 cops being charged or police action and police activity.
Yeah.
Uh, they feel affronted because they cannot see anything. If they do, then they may be disciplined internally in the service or other forms of disciplinary action could be taken. So when they say that, oh, when doctors do things and this one do this and other people in other professions do, you know, there's a certain kind of response or a certain narrative. But when the police do something, they tend to, you know, things that tend to be aired in the public space. Um, they find that they should be given a certain level of respect, no matter what, whether they're right or wrong. And in cases where they are charged, uh, they don't feel that they should be accounting for the activity out there and people shouldn't comment.
Oh,
So you
okay.
must be silent in the wake of the actions of the police, but you're free to speak about everybody else as far as they're concerned.
Because when I heard him say those things, I said, the way he was referring to it, like, you don't see them in handcuffs, you don't see them before the courts, you don't see them that. But these
Yeah.
policemen, the others are being, offended in a sort of way. They demoralized and all that kind of thing because these guys were charged. And so I said, well, how could he say that? That sounds kind of prejudicial.
But you see, the thing and all is what he may not understand is there's a difference, and he very well understands, but he's just playing on words. There's a difference when you're criminally charged as a doctor. Didn't we have a very popular surgeon in this country who was charged for murder?
Yeah.
And he went before the courts. Didn't he complain that he had to ride the police bus and how it was destroying his surgical hands? and he had to stand there and hold on to these wire things. It wasn't proper vehicles like they do now. The amalgamated vehicles that were being used prior to COVID were vehicles that they were playing Mozart and classical music in the background. They were saying that they wanted them to go to court hearing pleasant music and to engender pleasant vibes and to put pleasant thoughts into their head and to put them in the correct mood and spirit. The level of care that was meted out to prisoners before COVID in those amalgamated vans was top of the line treatment. They were sitting in proper chairs, proper maxi individual seats with proper music playing. When I say proper music, I mean what we term classical soothing music. But this particular surgeon, he came out and said in his time when he was arrested in the mid-90s, he had to ride the bus like every common criminal, stand up there regardless of what his status was and hold on to that chain link or that corrugated wire and twist and turn with every brakes the van mash, the driver trash, and it was really, really uncomfortable. Now, what Agares Gideon Dixon is speaking about, the ASV who's in charge of the Welfare Association, more or less saying, is that you don't see doctors in handcuffs, you don't see other persons who breach the law in handcuffs and being taken to court and all the public eyes on them. They need to understand that it is when the police has a mandate to serve and protect with pride, and the police are law enforcement. When law enforcement now have breached the laws of this land and are being treated, and they ought to be treated in the same manner that the common citizen is treated when they breach the law. So the reason why the media may be focusing on the police in such a solid way and not the doctor or the accountant or maybe the politician, it's simply because isn't it ironic that we're seeing a police going to court in handcuffs when it's normally the reverse?
Yeah.
So why should he take offense when it happens? In fact, he should take pride to know that the law is being enforced in an equal-handed manner for the common man as well as the police to keep the other 1,000 police in line.
That's right.
So when their moral is low because they've seen 8 colleagues on their way to court, their moral should be high that they ain't wanted the 8, and the moral should be high in terms of that is a good reminder for me when I'm out there to do things in a proper way that I ain't gonna be one of them. So I guess he's singing for his supper. He's the welfare officer, and if he don't say anything, this thing people will come out and say, "Still the welfare officer ain't say nothing," and look what's going on.
Yeah.
Sometimes it works for lawyers too. Sometimes a lawyer is criticized heavily in the media or criticized heavily on social media, and sometimes you hear other lawyers come out and say, "Well, the law association didn't come out and make a statement and defend that particular lawyer and say, he's just doing his job." But when people criticize him and say, you're representing a set of reprehensible, indefensible criminals, the association should come out and make a statement and say, listen, the legal profession has a requirement to provide to the public, and the legal aid has a requirement to provide an attorney free of choice for a man, and everybody deserves representation. So when you criticize the lawyers, you're criticizing the system, and the lawyer is there to fulfill a mandate to look after the interests of the individual. If the police evidence is strong, the lawyer can say what you want. That man going to jail or he might have.
That's right.
So
clarify that for me. So as
where we are.
Yeah, now before we continue to as we go along, we have a special guest today in the person of Miss Paige DeLeon, and she's of the TNT Promoters Association. So we are wait when she appears and stuff. But you can get down to the meat of your matter. I just needed you to clarify that for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure the public will be happy for that piece of information also. I was looking at the newspaper. I was given some directions as to what we should look at today in some way. And we were looking at the Prime Minister's comment that the violence is a public health emergency, that it ought to be treated, crime and the levels of criminality we have gotten to now. It seems to speak into the public space that the problem is so dynamic and so out of control that the health of the nation seems to be at risk, not just the victims of crime or the families of the victims. I was exploring in my mind's eye what the Prime Minister possibly meant, and like everything else, I started to look at the newsprint because I said I don't want to misinterpret the PM. But I want to quote something he said, and I think it's relevant because we're talking about crime in general now, but as it speaks to this possible public health issue. In the Trinidad Express, dated Sunday, the 3rd of July, 2022, there's a column by Camille Hunt, the writer, and it's entitled "The Rubric is Violence, a Public Health Emergency." Here, what is our Prime Minister is saying, and I'm quoting here. This is about the 7th paragraph. On the latter incident, Rowley said, and the incident he is referring to is the incident of there were 4 police shootings, 3 involving civilians. Well, 3 in particular involving civilians, and that particular would have been those 3 young men who lost their lives, the teenagers, the 2 teenagers and the 21-year-old. And he was saying, Rowley said, there appears to be many people in TNT prepared to take risks or to risk their lives, arming themselves and engaging law enforcement. So he said he saw law enforcement has to do reasonable thing of responding to people who are armed. And then he says, what does the population expect? We can't walk away from armed people who are handling firearms illegally in that kind of conduct and confrontation. So the PM was saying here, basically, that he's making a note that civilians are prepared to engage the police. And what do they expect? That the police ought to respond accordingly. Now, I have no problem with that comment. Realistically speaking, if it is you're a police officer and you have a duty to fulfill, and you're confronted by gunfire, you can't respond to gunfire by throwing macaroni pies at anybody. And you certainly can't take the kneel. You can't go kneel long in front of them and ask them and try to reason with them. So the return of gunfire is expected. My concern, however, is that there's some stats that are being bandied in the public space, and I think that when I say stats, I mean statistics as it relates to police shootings over the years. I was engaging the print media because I don't like to say things from the top of my head. David, do you know that when you look at the amount of police shooting of civilians through the years, and when I say shootings, I'm meaning, I don't want to use the word killings, but it comes down to that. The police kill a number of civilians through the years. And if it is, we look at the stats. I was looking at the Sunday, July 10, 2022 Guardian newspaper, and it was stated that in 2015, there were 17 police-related killings in this country. In 2016, there were 28 police killings. In 2017, 36. In 2018, 37. 2019, 32. 2020, 33. And 2021 so far, well, not so far, 2021, 32, and 2022 so far, 16. Now, of course, those statistics vary because I've been monitoring these figures for some time, and that is what is carried in this newsprint. I can just tell you that there is some variation, because in 2020, though this article I just quoted said there were 33 police killings in 2020, I had access to an article back in 2020, at the end of 2020, where they indicated that there were 55 police killings. So the statistics differ. One is saying 33 and one is saying 55 in 2020. And in 2019, I have one that says 32. The 22 corresponds. So it varies a bit. 2020 is a year, it's a 20 more is being carried in a previous newspaper as opposed to now. But let me put it this way. Let's look at the international stats, right? When you look at police killings around the world, do you know that in England, where the population is 59.9 million people, that when you examine the statistics, in the year 2019, only 3 people died at the hands of police in a population of 59.59 million people that is England alone, England and Wales. I mean, when you think about that, you have 59.59 million people. We just have 1 million or 1.5. In the whole of 2019, there were only 3 people of that 59.59 million that the police were responsible for killing. And we haven't gone into these stats as it's not important to go into what the circumstances of those killings were. But when you compare the same year for Trinidad and Tobago, where the population is just 1.5 million, we had 32 killings. So what makes policing in England, where there are 59 million people, so much easier than policing in Trinidad, where there are 1.5? Is it that we have a violent nature here, people of a violent nature that cannot control themselves and are acting in such an erratic manner that our law enforcement have no choice but to respond and react in a certain way? Now, that's just England, right? If it is, you look at Canada.
Yeah.
The Canadian stats seem to reflect that in a population of 38.1 million people, that in 2021, there were 32 killings by police officers. And in 2020, 36. So the numbers went up in terms of 32 people being killed at the hands of the police. But that population was 38 million, which is Canada, and the year was 2021. In 2020, it was 36. So when we look at our population size and the amount of police killings, we have to be concerned. Now, the United Nations indicated, and the WHO said, that in a population of 1 million, anytime you have a death ratio, and we're dealing with murder now, right? If you have a death ratio of 10 per 1 million and more, then you have a public health issue. So murder is being treated according to the World Health Organization standards. When it is you have 10 persons being killed in a country per million and more, meaning 10 plus persons per million on average, then that in itself is a public health issue. Trinidad and Tobago's statistics reflect that we are 24.1 per million. So it means to say that we are almost double and a quarter over the UN, the United Nations and World Health Organization standard. Now, it's always said that statistics are lies and damn lies. I'm just putting all the space there, meaning that the empirical data, not just Keith Rowley, is assigning that it's a public health issue. When we look at the empirical data worldwide, it's not just the PM stating that we have a public health issue. I mean, I would imagine he's copying the editorial and the data that he would have gleaned based on, and he's making that statement based on our statistics. And just to round it off, in a population of 25.69 million people, which is Australia, in 2018, they had 21 police killings. Now, in no way am I trying to malign the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and say, when we look at the stats, our police in a deplorable state. I'm not making that criticism at all, because I'm sure the deputy commissioner might take you a task and then he started to say, we quoting stats and we're not considering other factors. But having said that, I like to engage the public in terms of having put that into the public space there. It's no new information. There's a Police Service Act, David, that governs the functions of a police. It dictates the function of a police. The same way we have an employment contract. And when you work for an organization, they make you sign an agreement that this is what we're engaging you for, and this is the service you ought to provide. When it is you join the police service, you would be informed as to what the expectations are. I mean, you ought to inform yourself even before you join. But according to the Police Service Act, Provision 45, which is Section 45, it says, and it identifies what is the role and function of a police. One is, and the first one, the police shall preserve peace and detect crime and other breaches of the law. So it's the first thing that a police should do is to preserve peace and to detect crime. So in preserving peace, sometimes you must detect crime. So it's not by coincidence those two pieces are put together in the same sentence, right? To preserve peace, you have to detect crime. And to detect crime, you must have investigations, you must have informants, you must have information. And the police must be capable of putting their intelligence to use in solving the crime in order to achieve peace. The second one, the police may arrest, charge, and bring before a summary court a person found committing any offense rendering him liable to arrest without warrant, or whom he reasonably suspects having committed any such offense. In other words, if the police, and this is what we were talking about last week, if the police have reasonable grounds to believe that Fareed Ali is about to commit a crime, before I even commit the crime, I could be arrested because they have a reasonable basis to believe that I'm up to no good. That is why the man loitering on the nation streets 2 o'clock in the morning, when most people are asleep, the police can form the opinion that he may be up to no good because it's an unreasonable hour to be out. And it's unreasonable that he can't provide a proper explanation as to why he's up and walking about at 2 a.m. in the morning with no special purpose. So they can form on a reasonable basis that the average human being, the reasonable man, would be home in his bed or in a secured area, not in a public space. So on that basis, that doesn't mean to say it's illegal to be outside, but if you're outside and you can't explain why you're outside and you can't provide a reasonable explanation, the police are within their power, they can arrest you. Further to that, the third one, a police may summon before summary court a person who he reasonably suspects of committing an offense. So to explain what that means, sometimes you are arrested. The police come by your house with a warrant. They take you into custody. They restrain you. They detain you. They take you to the station. They lay a charge and they carry you to court. But sometimes they could serve you a summons. Let's say you and your neighbor get away over anything, and let's say you assaulted the neighbor. The neighbor makes a complaint at the station. The police can serve you by way of summons, and the document, when served upon you, indicates that you ought to come to court on the 1st of August before the Port of Spain Magistrate Court to answer to the charge, and they tell you what the charge is. When you turn up at the court, the charge is read to you at the magistrate, and you're placed on bail, released on your own recognizance, or remanded in custody, and you get a trial date. So you can be served by way of summons. So the police has tools, David, in which to approach the public. And I don't want to go through the long list, but I'll just raise one more. The police may prosecute a person who commits any offense. So, in other words, prosecute means that they could investigate and lay a charge, let's say for murder. And when they lay that charge for murder, you come before the court, and they themselves, meaning the officer who laid the charge, may not prosecute. But the police in the courtroom, in tandem with the state counsel lawyer from the DPP's office, will then take control of the matter at the courtroom, and they would proceed through the state counsel to lead evidence against you to prove the charge of murder. So what we have happening in this country is the police has a mandate and a function. So when you hear that the police are out there fulfilling their function, we as citizens have a civic responsibility to respect the role of the police, but to understand that they're fulfilling a legally binding function governed by the Police Service Act. The Police Service Act empowers them to fulfill certain functions. Now, the fulfilling of that function doesn't mean to say that they go out there and do anything they feel to do. Remember some weeks ago, I told you that it's a police standing order. And the police standing order determines, it's a guideline. It speaks to how police ought to conduct themselves when they're in the public, how they ought to go about their function and their duties. There's police standing orders, as they call it. The police standing orders, there's a standing order 28, which I referred to in the past, but I'm referring to a different section now. It talks about investigations, and an investigation, according to the standing order 10, Provision 10 says an investigation is a process whereby information is systematically collected, collated, analyzed, and determined with a prima facie case, whether a prima facie case can be made out against a perpetrator. Now, to cut through all that fancy language, when the police have to conduct an investigation, they have to utilize whatever tools that they avail. They have to utilize whatever resources they have. So they have police vehicles, they have police stations, they have pen and paper. They have a database, a computer that has a history of every criminal offender in this country who they fingerprinted through the years. So if it is they figure there was a crime that took place in the Tunapuna market, and they automatically may have suspects because they have a list on their database of persons who are custom breaking in the Tunapuna market, who are custom committing offenses of a similar nature of breaking and entering. So those people may initially be brought into the dragnet and say, well, it take place in Tunapuna, the Tunapuna market got broken into. Let me check out John, Paul, and Jane to start with. It may mean that they're innocent, but you're just checking them out because they have a history of committing offenses of a certain nature. In the same way in our hotspot, so this is where I'm leading to my center here now, right? In our hotspot, as we say, the hotspot always gets blamed in this country when criminality starts taking place. When the police have an exercise to conduct and they have to drive the vehicle around the place, they end up in Second and Lilonia, they end up in Mova, they end up in Sealots, they end up in the Beatum, and back at there, certain places in Point, right? And they target certain places because they don't expect to find criminals in Gulfview and Westmoreland and North Valsayn. They associate those places with, the sacred and the sacrosanct.
Yes, the goody two shoes.
Yeah. It can sense you're wasting resources and burning diesel to go where you'll meet saints. So what happens is you get into a community like Second Caledonia and you see three men in a B12 or a Honda Civic, and one time it ain't no BMW and it's certainly a Mercedes Benz, so the vehicle in itself suspect. Then you notice the men wearing vests, you notice that they not slowing down, they start to speed up when they see the police vehicle. So that in itself arouses a certain level of suspicion, like that's something the high rider is speeding. So you give chase, and the men know that if you stop, it's only humiliation because they had to come out of the vehicle, lie down on the ground, and get rubbed down, and inconvenience, and we'll talk, and then you don't know how it may go after that. So I am saying that that's a narrative that we all out there listening may live with from a day-to-day perspective. But the Standing Orders and the Police Service Act doesn't give the police that amount of wide discretion to do as they feel. I just read to you what the Police Service Act says, that they're there to protect and serve, they're there to investigate, they're there to do what is reasonable, and they're there to act in a manner that is consistent with recognizing the rights of all citizens of this land, regardless of whether they're from Valsayn, Gulfview, or any other, Millennium Park by Trinity Mall, anything at all. In other words, regardless of your status and who you are, you ought to be treated in like manner. And the Standing Order says that in putting together an investigation and gathering investigative material, there's a science behind it. It's not just a discretion where you go out there and you profile a black man or profile a yellow man or a brown man and you leave the white man alone. You go out there and then you look for things that are sustainable. You look for things of evidential value that could stand up to scrutiny. So in an investigation, your job as a police is to determine what happened, when it happened, where it happened, why it happened, and who committed the crime. And where I'm getting to this point, there are certain tools available to the police in executing that function. And according to Standing Order 28, Provision 14, it says, police officers, and I'm quoting here, a police officer in investigating a crime shall use these tools and aids and external agencies where necessary for investigation. And it mentions under tools, medical certificates, death certificates, they may have identification parades. So in other words, if it is you want to arrest a man, you just don't just charge. You don't just charge a man for a criminal offense. You have to go through an investigative process. And in going through the investigative process, you may have to engage an identification parade, which is you line somebody up who might be let us say the suspect of the person who suspected of committing a rape, he has been described as brown skin, clean shaven, around 6 feet tall, medium build. So we got a height of 6 feet, we got a build of medium build, we get a color of brown skin, 6 feet tall. Then you need to go out there as officers and try to find people fitting that description, lined up on an ID parade of 9 persons, and have the person under strict lighting conditions come and look at the 9 persons. The 9 persons, according to the Standing Orders, must be similar color, orientation, race, ethnicity, so on and so on, and similar build. and then have that person stand amongst the persons that you know could be, I understand, people who aren't suspects. So you have the real suspects standing among persons who you know not to be suspects. They are the props that you're using, the human props. And see if the person who's identifying the individual that may have committed the crime on them or has committed the crime on them, if they can identify them under specific conditions. So that is a tool that the police has. Now, I'm saying that to get to this point, the issue of body cameras, David. I am reading where Sheridan Hill, right? Sheridan Hill is the police communications officer. He came out and said recently that there is no law that binds and bounds the police to wear body cameras. And therefore, the issue of wearing a body camera and when you're conducting your function as the police, that there is no law that speaks to the fact that the police must wear it. So although the police service is saying they're spending $1,000 on a camera, and there are 1,160 body cameras available, and that the cameras are being made available across the board to members of the interagency task force, the highway patrol officers, and officers under operational command. These are the areas highlighted. In other words, you have 1,065 cameras that are made available to police officers, or when they're on certain specialized functions, let us say the IATF, the Interagency Task Force, which is the force that those 8 officers came from. When they're on special exercises, they ought to be, it is voluntary, it appears, voluntary that they wear those cameras. It is not mandatory, meaning they have to. Sheridan Hill is saying, and I'm quoting here, the Trinidad Guardian, July 10, 2022. This is Mr. Hill. He's saying, and I'm quoting, we actually heard Mr. Hill, who is the communications representative for Mr. Jacob, use a very feeble and unacceptable statement to say you can't force police officers to wear body cameras because there is no law that mandates it. So when the public is being sold that, you know, they are going to ensure that police officers wear body cameras, and they mean the TTPS, and the commissioner, the acting commissioner, comes out and says that we have 1,065 of them, and that is going to be used. We're hearing now that from the communications unit, somewhat of the antithesis of what the commissioner is saying, or the antithesis of what Fitzgerald Hines is saying, the Minister of National Security. You're saying on one bread that the specialized units will be wearing the cameras, and that is a tool that is available to the police. And you're hearing that that is going to assist in clearing up and offering clarity to the public in relation to when they engage the public, whether it is force was being applied to them, and hence they had to reasonably respond in like manner. In other words, if you're wearing the body cameras and people shooting at you, the cameras ought to pick up you having to duck fire in Trini language. And the cameras ought to pick up at least the sound of gunshots ringing out. And the camera ought to pick up any dialogue taking place. So if it is a rank and file member of a hotspot is saying, I will kill you, all of that should be being picked up on the camera, I would imagine. And when the police saying, put down your guns, all that should be, in other words, the real life imagery that the body cameras is going to capture in order to bring clarity to what is happening on the street when the police confront with the public. That only exists, or that can exist by way of a body camera capturing that scenario. But instead, when you have the police communications officer coming out and saying that, oh, it's not mandatory, meaning they don't have to wear it. It doesn't read well with the public. In other words, what you're telling, so what are you saying? That contrary to what Fitzgerald Hines is saying, contrary to what the commissioner of police, well, the deputy commissioner is saying, or the assistant commissioner in this case, that the police can just very well say to them, I'm not engaging it. To me, that sounds it's frightening. Now, I'm saying all of that to tie it into this. If your standing orders, if your police standing orders 28 is saying that one of the tools that police can use is identification parades in order to properly identify somebody. It goes on to say under standing order 28 subsection 14 Roman numeral 2, it says that you can use fingerprint material when you're investigating a crime, photographs, identification parades again was identified, police armor, judges' rules. In other words, what they're saying is one of the aids, one of the tools that is available to the public or to the police would be, in my view, body cameras fall as part of it. The same way you use photographic supplements, fingerprint, DNA, ballistics testing. If it is you're wearing body cameras, to me, if an interpretation of the police standing orders, this body camera will assist the police in terms of establishing some level of clarity as to whether they acted in a manner consistent with the mandate under Section 45 of the Police Service Act. So for Sheridan Hill to come out and say that he doesn't think that there is no mandate that says that you ought to use it, that to me is ludicrous and ridiculous. If we were to take it a bit further as it relates to the use of body cameras, what we need to bear in mind is that the public confidence in the police service, every time you hear there's a killing, the public confidence tends to wane. When we examine the stats, and I don't want to not quote from the newsprint, the Police Complaints Authority is an oversight body. The oversight body is responsible for investigating complaints about the temperament of police in terms of whether it's criminal, in terms of how they act, they go about their function. Let me quote what the Complaints Authority's mandate is, right? Very briefly. The Police Complaints Authority has the function to do a number of things. According to Section 21(1) of the Police Complaints Authority Act, it says that the authority, one, has the authority to investigate criminal offenses involving police officers, police corruption, and serious police misconduct. So if the police is accused of killing civilians who are unarmed, such as the 3 young men in 2020 June in 2nd Caledonia, and such as if it is proven, so I'm not saying that is so, that investigation is not complete. The one by Republic Bank in Port of Spain, South Port of Spain. If it is deemed that those killings, those individuals didn't return fire, because the families of those 2 teenagers and the 21-year-old, they are saying that the fellas were unarmed, and the police saying that they shot at them, and hence they returned fire, and it resulted in 2 young men, 2 teenagers dying, and a 21-year-old. So if it is the police shoot at unarmed persons, that may, if the investigation reveals, that may amount to serious police misconduct. That is something that is the Police Complaints Authority may investigate. In the same way as in June 2020, when those 3 young men, older men in their 30s, were alleged to have shot at the police, and they returned fire, and the 3 persons died, and well, the investigation revealed something else. 8 police officers were charged for murder. The Police Complaints Authority has the power to investigate such incidents. Now, the Complaints Authority also has the power to undertake inquiries or audits of any aspect of police activity for the purpose of ascertaining whether there is police corruption or serious police misconduct or circumstances that may be conducive to both. It simply means to say that the Complaints Authority can ask questions. They can summon individuals, meaning that, you see, the same we have a commission of inquiry. We were talking about commissions of inquiry in the past, David, where a commission of inquiry can be convened, and the person who is in charge, the chairman, he can, by way of summons, send for David McIntyre or Richard Norrie or Farid Ali or Paul Richards, and call them and ask probing questions about things that may be within their knowledge or that they ought to know. And you can't refuse to answer. You have to share the information, and there may be consequences if you fail to respond to the summons and fail to do any or answer the questions. So under Section 22 of the Complaints Authority, if it is the chairman, David West, convenes a hearing and he calls on certain officers or he calls on certain public figures to step forward and to assist with information pertaining to the murders and the killings in 2nd Caledonia in 2020, or in South Port of Spain in 2022, There are consequences for refusing to present yourself. I want to allude to this. The police complaints authority, when persons are killed, if they investigate and they figure they have the view that charges ought to be laid on somebody, and somebody meaning police were responsible in their view after they conducted their investigation for the killing of an individual. The PCA doesn't have the power to cause a charge to be made. They could say, we investigated, we felt that the police actions were criminal, and they recommend to the DPP that a charge for murder be laid. A typical example is, remember Ornella Graves, David? Remember that name? She was the person on July 1st.
Yeah.
In 2020, when they were protesting the death of the 3 persons in Second Caledonia.
Yes.
Her position was that she was shot by police officers. There was a big public outcry, and the PCA investigated. And according to what I'm reading here, on the 10th of July 2022, it was carried in the newsprint that the PCA recommended that criminal charges be laid against the officers. And to date, as far as I know, though the recommendation came from the PCA that those police officers ought to be charged, or someone ought to be charged, or the police ought to be held accountable, I don't know why anything wasn't done. I could only say that being an oversight body, it can do an investigation and it can make a recommendation, but it cannot cause the DPP to lay a charge. The DPP has to act on information that is received. It has received. And if there's a parallel police investigation, then what the DPP ought to do is to wait until the police investigation is complete and look at the PCA's recommendation based on their investigative material, and look at the police recommendation based on its investigative material, and make a decision as to how it's going to act. The DPP's office cannot take direction from the police complaints authorities, an independent body. So it's not to say because David West and the PCA make a recommendation, the DPP has to act accordingly. They can't trump and follow suit. The function of the DPP is they could look at the investigative material that the police would have collected based on the investigation into the death of Ornella Graves. And then based on that investigation, they may say, well, they don't see the need to lay a charge. This is the sort of information that is out there. So the public ought to rest easy when they hear that there's all these police killings, because there are resources you can turn to. You're free to go to the Police Complaints Authority. I believe it's Building D, close to the Hyatt in Port of Spain and Rising Road. And you file a complaint if there is a death, if somebody dies, and you believe that it was as a result of police actions. There's a clause in the Police Complaints Act that I want to draw to the attention. And David, I know if you could bear with me. If it is you're hearing this for the first time, you must let me know. According to what is written here, you know that provision 28 says that where a person A makes a complaint under this act and dies, right? So you make a complaint that the police acted in a particular way that in your view was illegal to the complaints authority, and the person subsequently dies. That's one scenario. Or makes a complaint and for any reason is unable to act for himself after making the complaint. Meaning that you make the complaint, but you can't follow up with certain exhibits or documentation or video footage that you may have that your house may have captured image of the police doing something wrong. If you make the complaint and then for some reason somebody come, I ain't calling names or I ain't pointing fingers at any organization, but you make a complaint and then somebody come and they take your video footage, they seize it. So you no longer have any video footage to provide to the PCA. You could go make a complaint about what has happened and how your video footage happened to be destroyed. And then it says that if a person or where a person could have made a complaint but died before doing so, or is for any reason unable to act for himself, the complaint may be made or continued by his personal representative, a family member, or an individual suitable to represent him. In other words, let us say, and I'm not throwing any stones in the dark. Let us say an individual, before he could go and make a complaint on the police, he is killed mysteriously. Nothing prevents his representative or his family from completing the complaint on behalf of the deceased person. So, in other words, Section 28 makes provisions that even a person who has been aggrieved by the police, If it is they would find themselves, for whatever reason, unable to pursue the matter, whether by they die before they could make the complaint, but the complaint is known to a relative, the relative could complete the complaint on their behalf. Or if they began with a complaint, but when they called, I want to produce exhibits, they are hindered in some way, whether it be by civilians or police or anybody, they're free to inform the complaints authority, and that will be investigated too. So the power is there in the public's hands. Police killings, if it is anybody has a complaint to make about the circumstances and the situation relating to, police action, there is a law that governs how police ought to act. There's a standing order that determines the standard and the manner that police ought to execute the function as mandated in the act. And there is an oversight body to monitor the police. One thing I must say, when we look at through the years, Onella Graves might be a very popular example because you know that we have had, that's a more recent one. What about PC Gilks in April of 2020? Sorry, 2022. PC Gilks was an exercise in that Diego Martin Rich Plain area, if I'm correct. And he died under mysterious circumstances. At first, it was being said that the police were under fire, and he was shot in the neck by civilians shooting at the police. We had the commissioner, the acting commissioner of police, come out and lend his full support to the police, and he said, quote and unquote, that is a lot of hogwash in relation to the circumstances in which the incident happened. Our investigations will look at all angles, but the officers who were present have given how everything had occurred. Our officer is shot in his neck from the front, and we are talking about friendly fire. In other words, he was saying that when it is Gilks was shot, people in the public space is saying that he was shot by police officers and he was shot under friendly fire. That is what the civilians who were up there were saying. The commissioner came out and said, no, that is not so. That is not the report I received. That is not what the officers were saying. As it turned out that when he took the police side, I guess he's defending his officers first and foremost. I can't blame him for that. If he has to believe somebody, he goes with what the police saying. They have no reason, if they're protecting with and serving with pride, to lie or to misrepresent what happened. So he came out in full support of the officers, only to realize down the road that the story was in fact what the civilians were saying. Gilks was shot from behind according to the pathologist report. So therefore he could not have been shot by those who were shooting at them. He had to be shot from behind, which is the officers who were standing from behind him. Now we are seeing where investigations can work for the police and work against them. There's another incident, and if we go a little way back, in Chumakak in October 2018, 5 men were shot dead by police officers in Chumakak, Laventille. According to the eyewitnesses' reports, the 5 men, Shaquem Francois, Kadeem Philip, Chandel St. Clair, Meshach Douglas, and Nicholas Barker were playing cards when they were confronted by police officers who opened fire. Eyewitnesses claim that when the men were shot, they had their hands in the air. Police, however, claimed that they were shot at first and returned fire. They said that they recovered 2 weapons from the scene. Police sources told media that 2 of the victims were suspects in a murder that occurred earlier in the year. And a media report claimed that an investigator found that the gunshot wounds sustained by the 5 victims were curious. So we've had instances over the years, and where it is not the first time civilians have claimed that the police shot with deadly force on our men. It isn't just the latest one that took place where the 2 teenagers and the 21-year-old were leaving a party in Diego Martin and were cornered by Republic Bank in Port of Spain South and shot to death. And an allegation was they shot at the police first. Or the June 2021 involving the 3 men in Caledonia, 2nd Caledonia, where the police say they shot first. We've had instances as far back as 2018 October, where the police claimed that individuals shot at them and they returned fire with deadly force. And we had and those incidents, it is being bandied in the public space that there were no forensic evidence in terms of ballistic testing results that reflect any shells other than the police shells on the scene where the incident took place, the locus, as they say in law. So in police-related killings, we have to take this with a pinch of salt. Now, having said all of that, let's move forward a bit. our Prime Minister is saying that we have the crime has gotten to the levels where police are so brave, or people are so brave, that they're shooting at the police. Like everything else, criminality becomes politicized. We have a situation where the MP for Naparima, Rodney Charles, he's coming out and he's asking the permanent secretaries to make sure and get a clear mandate, right, or clear terms of reference from the police. Well, not the police, from the office of the Prime Minister in how they ought to approach this interministerial approach to criminality. In other words, if it is, we are now saying that crime is a public health issue, and we are also stating that in addition to it being a public health issue, we have a situation where the Ministry of Social Development and Health is combining its resources with the Ministries of National Security, Sport and Education, and working with the Police Service and the Tobago House of Assembly under the tutelage, so to speak, of the Office of the Prime Minister. Rodney Charles is saying this is a pie in the sky approach that we haven't had, or it hasn't been bandied into the public space. It hasn't been put into the public space. What that language means, when it is it's almost as if the buck is being passed. I'm seeing Ms. De Leon joining us.
Yes,
it's also when the buck is being passed on to the ministries. It's the old trick of bringing the ministry, the different ministries involved in a mandate to try to find ways and means of solving criminality. And when we don't get the results that we want, we have more people to blame. It's no longer the Ministry of National Security and the TTPS. We will say the ministry is not fulfilling their mandate. Perhaps we should engage Ms. De Leon, because I know we would have a certain timeline for her and so on.
Yes, I agree. Good afternoon, Ms. De Leon. Could you turn on your microphone and join us here? Paige De Leon. She is of the Trinidad and Tobago Promoters Association. Yes, kindly turn on your microphone, please. We are waiting Ms. De Leon to join us here. Okay, there she is. She's joining us now. Good afternoon, ma'am, and how are you?
Good afternoon. Fine. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you and all of your listeners.
Good. Farid Ali is my co-host today, and you'll chat with him as we continue till 6 o'clock. So, Farid, it's all to you.
Good afternoon, ma'am. How are you?
I am very well. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you engage us, and it's equally a pleasure to hear your voice. Very often, so much things are being said in the public space, but we don't get individuals who are willing to put their voice to what is being carried. So we have to appreciate the effort you're making in that regard. I want to ask you to introduce yourself before we get into the meat of any discussion. At least the public is listening. We're being carried on Facebook and the Radio 102 and so on. So perhaps you can tell us a bit about yourself, and then we'll get into our discussion in terms of what you do and your function and so on.
Okay, so I am the advocate for the Trinidad and Tobago Promoters Association. The Trinidad and Tobago Promoters Association was formally aligned about 3 or 4 years ago now, with the specific purpose of representing the issues of those persons who are practitioners in the event production sector. As you will all be aware, the tourism product that comes out of that sector forms in large part the most significant element of what we export as a country. So most of the tourists that come to Trinidad come as a consequence, and Tobago rather, come as a consequence of the events that are put on by event producers during the carnival period, and of course throughout other parts of the year. So the responsibility of the association is to coalesce those interests and to represent them adequately to the other stakeholders in the stakeholder spectrum. My name is Paige De Leon, and I am the person who supports the board of the TTPA as a professional in ensuring that those issues are represented to the right people at the right time and in the right way.
So let's get into an area that may be a bit touchy, right? As controversial as it may sound. There is bandit in the public space, and when I say the public space, I want to quote the July 24, 2022 Guardian newspaper. There's a headline and an article carried by Joshua C. Mungal. And that headline reflects that senior cops demand up to $200,000 from promoters to provide security at fence. And when you get into the body of the article, it speaks to the fact that the nature of events and carnival events or events in general is you must have police presence at fetes and parties and these get-togethers, these fundraisers. And one of the challenges that promoters face is that they have a certain number of tickets to sell. Naturally, this is being done for profit. In as much as you're promoting Trinidad as a cultural product and as a tourist-based product in terms of our culture, steel band, music, and so on. You're selling that product to the public, but you're also making a profit. So promoters get involved, and people are involved in the industry, including the artists. They do it because love of the music, talent, and the fact that they have a product that is marketable. My question to you is this. When you look at hosting a fete or promoting an event, the budget to host that event is enlarged when you have to engage police strength, as they say, meaning if you have to have 50 to 100 police officers at that event, and the officers ought to be paid based on rank a certain amount of money, and you're being dictated to that you need so much of strength, meaning they tell you how many officers you would need, then you automatically find yourself with a budget and you have to find money to support that event by way of providing the police service. And my position is this: how do you all propose the issue of security at these events ought to be calculated in a manner that is fair?
So there's a couple things that go into how you answer that question, because it's not just about a calculation. It is also about a process. And you use the term security, which is quite essential, but there are many private firms across Trinidad and Tobago that in fact provide security at these very said events of which we speak. And the challenge that the association has is not just about the amount of police officers that have to be there, but it's also about the process. The process is based on a law which is archaic and it is no longer fit for purpose. And what we are trying to do as an interest group is we are trying to see how it is possible for us to have that process via legislative reform updated so that there can be better measures put in place to ensure that events are safe. We also host events in other parts of the world. Many of the practitioners in the association have brands that are global and they operate in 15 countries, some 6 countries, some 5 countries. And the status quo that exists in Trinidad does not obtain in any of those other jurisdictions. There is interaction with the state. There are mechanisms put in place to ensure that the right people know what is happening. But the way that things are done here is completely unique. And this is what we are attempting to have examined and certainly to have changed, because like any other business, it is being done for a profit. It's an entrepreneurial venture. It's also an extremely high-risk venture that these event producers engage in on a regular basis. And any additional cost is going to challenge the financial imperative of a practitioner, as is the case with any other business. So this narrative that consistently is put out that they're only interested in making money, everybody who runs a business is interested in making money. That is the purpose. That is how you are able to employ other people. that's how you are able to drive economic activity. It is because of that financial imperative. And so this is what we have to consider in the context of how we engage with the police and whether or not that expenditure is in fact efficient. Is it that when the police come in what we consider to be absolutely large numbers with large price tags attached, are we getting value for the dollar that is spent? And is there another way that we can provide the same kind of safety for our patrons and get a better return on our investment? Because at the end of the day, what people will also appreciate is that no event producer wants to have an incident kickoff at their event, because that then damages their brand and subsequently their ability to attract patrons at another time, so that nobody wants anything bad to happen ever at an event. So I think that that's a broad brush to paint over what you have asked, and to give a sense of where we are coming from in terms of how we are trying to get reform to take place in the sector.
What are some of the challenges specifically? What are some of the challenges that you face that you think ought to be addressed?
We would definitely want to have the occasional bar and dance hall licenses re-examined. Though that those pieces of legislation are no longer fit for purpose. They were created at a different time. The purposes they were created for no longer necessarily exist, but they are now being used, unfortunately, as a means of stifling the industry, which is a phrase that we have used in the past. We've been using it since we began in 2018, because in many instances, promoters have to stop doing events. You have to shut the event down because they simply cannot afford the cost. And one of the challenges with the cost of the security services as it currently stands is that these costs are ad hoc. You cannot calculate. You do not know what you are going to get. You don't know when you are going to get it. And like any other business, if you have a random ad hoc cost that is just thrown at you and it's very large, you then have to reconsider whether or not it makes sense doing what you are doing. So that's one of the challenges. We need the legislation that is in the form of the Occasional Bar and Dance Hall License Act. Those need to be reviewed and they need to be changed. The process of having to go to the court and the court then offering to the police service and the fire service jurisdiction to determine how many of their own number can be at an event without the event producer having a sense of what they're going to do, when they're going to do it, how many people are going to do it, and why, and having absolutely no command of what is done at their event when they have to spend this money. That needs to be looked at, again, in the context of the legislation. We also want to see that if new legislation is in fact put in place, it is legislation that is modern, that is fit for purpose, that speaks to the current environment and not something that obtained 60 years ago and more when this legislation was originally created. We also want to look at some kind of council of stakeholders, people who actually are involved in the process of creating events and those who are impacted and those people who have a sense of what the global best practice picture looks like, to sit on some kind of independent council to treat with the process for having an event, because this is no longer a situation where an event is some random happening. Events are happening in Trinidad every single day, and we don't have a framework for them. And that's why there is all of this, questioning and all of the challenges that happen, because there's no structure. And that's really, at the end of the day, what we are trying to achieve is structure and standardization.
Have you all approached the Carnival Development Corporation or similar organizations for assistance in getting the government's ear or the legislators' ear with regard to your concerns?
Well, I mean,
you all have used to get your message across, because you're doing that now, but I would imagine that you'd have taken it up at a higher level in a different place. Where have you all gone with this so far?
We've spoken to everybody, and we've been doing this now for the last 4 years. And as it stands, the lobbying effort and the conversations and the dialogue and the meetings have been going on for several years. We have had many meetings with the state-funded agencies that they mentioned, and we, of course, all have a similar objective, and that is to have an efficient, well-run, attractive, fit-for-purpose event arrangement in terms of carnival, if we are to be specific about carnival, that works for as many people as is possible in the stakeholder family. We have, in fact, had meetings with various attorneys general. We have, of course, spoken with the ministers of culture that have come and gone since we have been in existence. We have had news conferences. We have reached out to every single administrator in all of their incarnations in an effort to have these matters ventilated.
I'm gathering from your tone that through the cross-section of time, all these different AGs and ministries and government officials that you've spoken to and organizations, that you haven't gotten the level of traction that you sought to achieve, that still there's a lot to be done, if any, if not much to be done.
Correct. That's absolutely correct. We have not achieved what we had hoped we would be able to achieve.
Why aren't you getting that traction?
I could not answer on behalf of all of those stakeholders, but what I do know is that as a body, the Trinidad and Tobago Promoters Association has, engaged the stakeholder family completely, as much as we possibly can, over the last few years to have these issues ventilated and treated with appropriately. We have absolutely done our work in the context of advocacy and representation.
So it appears that despite your best efforts, things have remained in a deplorable state. There's been little improvement, if not just simply incremental improvement, but not at the strides that you would like it to take place.
I think that is an accurate assessment of the picture.
Oh, what if it is you all continue in the vein that you're continuing now? It doesn't appear from what you're saying that there's a master plan in place, that this year is going to be the last year for these sort of hiccups to present itself. It appears that you all are taking it quite lightly and have a peaceful approach to things. And when I say peaceful, don't get me wrong, I'm not insinuating you take any other step. In other words, your studied approach is not reaping the returns that you want. What steps do you intend to make moving forward in order to get the government or get the respective agencies' attention and let them know, listen, this is a now or never situation, that you either change your policies in order to help us and facilitate us in promoting Trinidad's culture, or we do things a different way. We put down our guns and not promote events anymore, and
so
let the industry.
That is something that has been, I suppose, mooted, at various intervals throughout the process, when some of the members have become completely frustrated that despite our best efforts, as you've said, nothing has changed. But I do not know that it is wise for us at this stage or at any point in the future to take that particular approach, because you then throw the baby out with the bathwater, because it's not all bad. Some of it is, but some of it is not bad. And we are very committed to keeping the flag of Trinidad and Tobago flying. And we are hopeful that as time goes on, and as we continue to do the work of advocacy, which takes time, it's not a tomorrow thing. It's not a today thing. It's something that we have to massage and nurture. And hopefully, in the shortest possible time, we will find that our ideas and our requirements and the needs of the industry find traction with those people who make policy. In the meantime, what we do have is a legislative challenge. And the only way to treat with legislative challenges is to pursue them through the courts. Now, that, as you would appreciate, is a significantly expensive process. and it's also quite time consuming and can be contentious. And as you've said, we have attempted to, continue to use our words as we say to our children. We've used our words consistently in this regard and hope that that is what is going to get us the results.
Allow me to quote something from the newspaper, and if you can comment, you can let me know. I'm reading here from the same article I referred to, the Guardian newspaper, the 24th of July 2022. It is said here that for party promoters to obtain a bar license, they must go before the court and show proof that the police and fire officers will be at the event. The number of officers present is determined by the senior superintendent at the police station located closest to where the event will be held. The senior officer is supposed to do research on the reputation of the promoters and discuss aspects of the party with them, attend the venue, type of crowd, and decide how many officers should be assigned. Each officer must be paid, so the more officers required, the larger the fee promoters must pay. It goes on to say, police officers could cost a promoter from $10,000 to up to $200,000 TT, because there was a Fed this summer that did over $100,000 in police, and this is just one Fed. So if what I'm reading is correct, the very nature of getting a bar license requires that the police attend the venue, and the police themselves do a calculation, if I were to use that word, or analysis. They make a determination as to how much strength in terms of officers ought to be present, and then they determine how much it's going to cost, and then that cost is dictated to you, the promoter. It doesn't seem like you could negotiate. Am I wrong in my decision there?
No, you are correct in your negotiation. Now the thing about it is that while the process appears to be straightforward, there are nuances and there are all sorts of things that happen in the practice of that process that create challenges. One of the things is that we received an opinion from senior counsel some time ago. And what we understood from the opinion that we received is that there is no prescription in law for police to be at your event, certainly not in the way that it exists now. The court has taken a decision that they are going to reach out and request that a recommendation be made. However, in practice, the court never goes against the recommendation of the police. Now, I am told it has happened on one or two occasions, but it is extremely rare and almost non-existent that those numbers are challenged. Nor do promoters ever have the time to challenge the numbers, because even if they do, the court has not shown itself to be amenable to changing the recommendation. And if your event is on Saturday and your decision or this directive to pay for these officers happens on a Friday afternoon, then at what point will you challenge it? Because then what you get is, well, you won't have your event if you don't do these things. And again, to go back to the point, this situation does not exist in any other country in the world. Many of the event producers that are in the membership do events all over the globe, and they do not have to treat with this in any other jurisdiction at all. This is a Trinidad and Tobago scenario, and that in itself is problematic.
Why are the inspections taking place so close to the event? And I could understand, reasonably speaking, that if the event is on the 15th of July, you don't want to be inspecting in January, because clearly the conditions, the environment could change in that time frame. So it needs to be as close as possible. But if you're saying that a decision is made on Friday and the FET may be weekend, or the FET may be in 3 days' time, it doesn't afford you the opportunity to appeal the decision.
But what is the environment of which you speak that can change? An event is going to happen in a particular place or space. The space is not going to grow or shrink. The way that the FET is being set up, the event is being set up, is going to be something that would have been prescribed well in advance by the event producer. These events are planned years in advance. The dates are available. The venues are booked well in advance. So there is no need for an event to be looked at 3 days in advance. There's no need for this close proximity to the event. And again, this is not best practice globally. It just isn't. If you have an event taking place in the savannah, then the event producer is going to know in advance, I'm going to put up $200 worth of scaffolding at these particular points. This is how much space it's going to take up. These are the amount of entrance, so on and so forth. In addition to which, as event producers, we have not now, nor have we ever been given any formula that speaks to how and why these strengths are prescribed. We do not have a formula in our hands, and we have asked for it several times that tells what this is about, why it happens. It simply is prescribed. That is, again, one of the challenges that we face.
So in other words, though you as a promoter and the events, the people who finance the events view what is being done with suspicion, meaning the police strength is dictated to you and you have no choice but to abide by or not have the Fed. You absorb the cost and you move on. That's what you're saying.
Well, that's what they have had to do. They've had no option.
Right. In New York, I've read in the newsprint that in New York that though you may have officers who may do an oversight of the venue before, on the actual day of the event, the promoters use private security. It appears that in Trinidad and Tobago, we aren't allowed such a luxury. We must engage the police.
We also have to have private security. We also have to have private security because those functions are controlled by the client, who is the event producer, and they then get to determine how those people operate, where they are placed, what they do, and what exactly they are there to look for. Again, no event producer who knows his event and who wants to have an event in the future is going to risk there being a breach in security. That is just not the way that professional entrepreneurs operate. It's the same with any other type of business. Security is key to the continued functioning of your business arrangement.
So it would be correct of me to say that though the police are there, the police are not there working for you, the promoter, and the event. They're there for general security. They're there to fulfill a function that was mandated by the TTPS. You can't dictate to the police to do specific things. You could only act they could only act on their discretion, or if they choose to get involved in something. They're just there for law and order, Anchor.
Well, that is what it appears to be, but to be cautious and careful about how one determines another entity's motive, I would want to, step away from saying.
I follow you.
Yeah.
But in other words, if it is you want somebody to fulfill a particular function on the day, you're better off hiring private security, and you have the power to determine what they do and not do. You don't want to have to rely on the police to do that for you.
Well, you are forced at this time, if you wish to direct the way that your security operations are done in your event, to hire private security. That is the status quo.
Sadly enough, from what you're describing, you're duplicating costs. Because now you have to pay the police for being physically present, and you can't get away. That's mandatory, because if you want your bar license, you need a certain strength. And if you want additional security, you need to hire a private person. So the burden that you all carry, it is correct of me to say, you're duplicating expenses. Sometimes in your view might be unnecessarily. You could trim costs and do the event at a much cheaper rate if it is certain things were put in place policy-wise.
Yes, that is correct to say.
What are some of the specific changes that you would like? You mentioned the bar license, and we have an archaic function that the thing is anachronistic, it's old. I would imagine you're tying that into the fact that you need the police to attend the event and they determine how much strength you need. We've covered that area. What are some of the other things in legislatively that you believe ought to be done? And you are free to compare what your observations are with events in other countries. What are they doing in other places that Trinidad is not doing?
We also need to look at a piece of legislation, or rather pieces of legislation, that specifically govern the function of hosting events. That's something that certainly does not exist here. And what you have in other jurisdictions is bits of legislation from different areas that cover the way an event functions and how it operates. So, for example, you have an event taking place in the United Kingdom, let's say, where you have a football match with 50 or 60,000 people, and there are only a few security officers available. Sorry, not security officers, but police officers available to that event, because they have a process and they have special safety regulations that are in place for the conduct of large events. Those things are specific to events. We do not have that kind of legislation here in Trinidad, and that's what we are looking for. And we recognize that prior to legislation, there has to be innovation, hence our suggestion of the independent committee of stakeholders that will guide a transitionary period where we decide what is best for our culture and our arrangement, because Carnival in Trinidad in particular, not all events, is a special beast. It's an organic beast. And so we want to be able to manage it in the context of what the realities are. So that's the kind of thing that we are looking for. We're not necessarily looking to wholesale grab anybody else's legislation and use it here because we are unique and we are special. But we certainly do need to have policy that governs the hosting of all types of events. And this is not something that is an unusual arrangement in any other country.
Do you have a would-be document, a policy document that you've put together in at least an ad hoc way, in some form, that you could direct the listening public to, that they could go read, they could see what your ideas are, they could see what you would like to be put into law, to be put into regulation? Do you have a document that you could refer us to?
We have, in fact, documents, but not that we can refer to, unfortunately, because they were sent to the government as a part of our deliberations, as part of our suggestions, and those documents have not been made public, and it would be irresponsible to do so until such time as they are properly ventilated by the state. But we have, in fact, been sending documents, policy documents, and various types of suggestions to the state for quite some time with regards to this, as well as, of course, our deliberations. But none of them are available to the public at this time. That is not to say we're not.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. I am on board with what you're saying. My only concern is, if it is you need to get the public behind your cause, or you need to attract support, then in the public space and in forums like this, I'm not saying in this moment now, but in forums like this, if it is you can direct the public to some document or some sort of I'm using the word dissertation. It's not necessarily dissertation. It's simply a write-up, some sort of manual, brochure that speaks to where we are now and where you intend to go, and what the problems are and the areas that you would like to see corrected. And when the public reads this sort of thing, you get people on board. The public would realize, but we're really backward in this country, and the people who are suffering is because of the poor public policy is the public that attends these events. The events really are geared towards ensuring that people have a good time at a price and at an affordable price. So I would think that you get traction.
No, I think that is an excellent suggestion, and perhaps it is something that I will suggest to the board of directors and to the membership, that we do a public document that is available for everyone to have a look at, so that they can in fact weigh in on what we are speaking of in a more structured way. As it stands, what we do is we speak about it on a regular basis. We have regular news conferences once a year where we ventilate the issues and we speak in sound bites to what we need. But I think that this is a good suggestion, and I am going to take it to the board of directors and to the membership and see whether or not this is something we can action, because I think it would get a good result. So I'm grateful for that.
One of my concerns is this. Growing up in Trinidad, you hear about events, and I don't want to call names, but there are certain fetes that you associate with violence. And some of those fetes now, they are no longer on the market in the carnival season or whatever season. So because of the violence associated with the event, they're no longer being hosted. Luckily for us in Trinidad and Tobago, that has become less of an issue now. given the amount of effort and energy being placed into hosting events, and for people like yourselves who promote events and have all this breadth of experience to bring to the table. Your experience has impacted upon the level of the product, the nature and the substance of the product. My concern is this: your organization, do you all invite all the promoters to be part of your association at every level? Meaning, I wouldn't like to, let me put it in a nice but delicate way. If your organization is viewed as a very elitist organization, that it's only promoters of a certain standing in society, of a certain clique and certain class.
Think that is how it's viewed? Is that you're saying that is how it's viewed now?
No, I'm not making a pronouncement. I'm saying that you may be the promoter and the person who's a representative of the Promoters Association of Trinidad and Tobago, let us say. But there must be bodies, so there must be, is your body all inclusive? How all inclusive are you all? Is it that you're an elitist body or not an elitist body?
No, we invite every single type of event producer across the spectrum, and this has been consistently our position from the beginning. Every single type of event producer is welcome to join the Trinidad and Tobago Promoters Association. Now there's a bit of a challenge with the name, because the thing promoters sometimes comes with negative connotations, as you would have alluded to earlier. Back in the day, some of those events, people associated with violence. So that's a bit of a challenge. But we refer to ourselves as event producers. And as a consequence, anybody who produces an event, and it's not just about fetes, it's also about weddings, about conferences, about sporting events, about religious events, about all sorts of things, fundraising things, community things, school things, concerts. Any kind of event producer is welcome to join the TTPA. We have a website that anyone can jump onto and find us and become a member with relative ease. There are absolutely no barriers to entry, save and accept our membership fee, which is nominal. And we've had a reasonably good response from people who felt that there was value in being a part of the lobby. As a Caribbean people, we are not necessarily aligned with the value system that lobbying brings to the table, because we have a different way of getting things done. But the world is changing. Our political landscape is changing. And we are also hopeful that this approach that we've taken will get a few more people on board, let them understand the value of having professional representation for the issues, because what that does is it creates sustainability. When you do get a result, it's a sustainable result, because it wasn't about anything that was misaligned with professionalism and proper respectability and responsible activity and action.
So if it is some young promoter comes into your organization, you all provide the mentoring and the share your experiences and the seasoned approach you all may have had, or older promoters may have, with that young promoter, and help to grow that individual and develop that promoter to create a standard for your organization.
That is what yes, absolutely. That is an arrangement that we do have inside of the association, where any young promoter is free to come in and they have access to other members. And what we're finding now more than ever is partnerships amongst event producers, which is not something that happened before, but we are in a new environment. And so there's a lot of partnership taking place now, and a lot of old and young promoters getting together and doing things and learning from each other, because the older promoters have a lot to learn from the younger ones at this point.
And vice versa.
Indeed.
What sort of numbers, if you want to put a percentage to it, what sort of percentage the Promoters Association of Trinidad and Tobago represent in terms of promoters out there? Are you all the majority? Your organization represents the majority of promoters, or it's an ongoing education process to get the others involved under the same umbrella?
The latter, indeed, the latter. It is an ongoing process of us trying to attract new members, and certainly members from diverse event groups, because we're mostly concentrated at the moment with people who host party type events. Now, what you have is cross-pollination in terms of the disciplines, because several of the event producers also produce conferences and various other things. But by and large, we're concentrated in the area of parties. So what we're hoping is that over time, and as people become more aware of us and they recognize the value of the work we're doing, more of them will come on board and become a part of what we do.
Because what I'm thinking of and all, and correct me if I'm wrong, when it is you merge with other younger promoters and you encourage younger promoters to get involved under your organization, you can share your networking and your know-how in terms of access to artists, access to things that they normally would not be able to achieve and acquire and bridge in their own strength. So in other words, coming under the umbrella of the Promoters Association of Trinidad and Tobago, one would find that resources are made available to one that they couldn't normally source on their own strength.
Well, that is an interesting approach. One of the things that we must remember is that this is business, it is entrepreneurship, and it is also competition. So that there has to be a balance between how you maintain a competitive advantage, and largely that's about networking, and how you support and mentor the growth of young persons. We do want at some point to expand our remit. And in that expansion, we are going to seriously consider how we harness the that we have access to as a group and share it amongst all of the practitioners in Trinidad and Tobago. Because one of the things that we do believe as a value is that there is room for everyone to operate. And that there, that we can in fact cooperate with each other, help, share, and support, and everybody can do well. Because, as you alluded to earlier, some of those events that used to happen back in the day don't happen anymore because the space has grown. Things have changed. People's tastes have changed. And that is always going to happen. And the only way to be able to harness that and to keep the thing fresh and keep it moving is to have new people come on board who understand today.
Does the Promoters Association of Trinidad and Tobago provide opportunities for up-and-coming artists to perform, perhaps, I don't want to say smaller events, so you give them an opportunity to grow and develop? Is that part of your vision, or is that something you all already on board with, or you all doing, or you have ambition to do?
That is definitely a part of the vision. It is about using the power of the numbers and using the power of the lobby to create an environment where events thrive, to create an environment where the culture thrives. The whole purpose of the lobby is to change the environment. And that then gives everybody the opportunity to tap into this salubrious environment that we're hoping to create and do well based on your competitive advantages, whatever they may be, or your unique selling points. That's the real purpose of the association, to make that environment workable and good and useful for everybody.
Are there similar associations, promoters associations, let's say of Barbados, of Grenada, of the different Caribbean islands that you all liaise with, or your organization in terms of the fact that you're de facto, you're registered, that is something peculiar to Trinidad, or we have similar organizations of the Caribbean?
We have similar associations, one in Jamaica in particular, although it is slightly different in terms of how it's structured. And I could be wrong about this, but I believe that there is also one in Barbados. It's possible that I'm not correct about that, but I think that there is one in Barbados. Outside of that, I'm not aware of any other associations. But again, that is a part of where we're hoping to take the movement, because anybody at any point can create a template that works well for others, particularly in the Caribbean, where we tend to be politically insular. This is a new political tool and a tactical weapon that can be used by any interest group and body to change their environment and to create more space so that there is growth, and that growth is based on good policy good content, and it can make our region better. Because what we do here in Trinidad and Tobago is not just about Trinidad. As I said earlier, the practitioners travel and they duplicate their efforts in various countries in the Caribbean. And we'd like to see this kind of environment created in all of those jurisdictions, because that works for everyone. That then becomes a Caribbean brand that is powerful and that's wonderful and that people want to come to, and that works well for all of us, not just those in Trinidad and Tobago.
The challenges that you are facing as an organization, what is that paralleled? Is it being repeated? That challenge is the challenge of the Grenadian organization, the Jamaican one, the other Caribbean islands?
No, unfortunately, in those islands, what we have found, and this is only based on anecdotal evidence, but what we have found is that the policy administrative organizations, organs, actors in those countries invite their event producers to they created an environment for them to thrive, which is somewhat different from what's happened in Trinidad and Tobago, because this has developed organically, so that the environment was not created for this to work well. We are working within an environment that exists and trying to find our way through a maze and cobble success out of it, which is why we are so great at what we do, because we have started, like Carnival started, out of challenge, out of adversity, whereas in the other islands, they have said, listen, this thing is working well in Trinidad. Let me create a space, a time, a day, and a place where you can do well. I'm giving you everything you need. Go. That is not what happens here, unfortunately. So while we are the gold standard for a reason, because it hasn't been handed to us on a silver platter as an industry.
What are some of the objectives you're hoping to achieve between now and the next year? Meaning not this carnival, let us say the carnival 2024. What are the things that you would like to see change? The primary things, the things that are imperative?
Yeah. The primary things are, we want to see this independent council of interests and stakeholders that is private sector based. Now, that's very important because we are the private sector. We do not receive any funding from the state. This is all done because of entrepreneurship and because of the private sector. And that's very important because it means that there is no political interference in what we do and what we say. That's really, really critical to the integrity of the association. So this independent council/body that we're hoping for would be private sector based, and it would therefore use the commercial imperatives to drive its suggestions and its policy requirements and whatever legislative reform happens. That's one. And two, we really need to see the legislation reviewed and reformed. The current legislation is not fit for purpose. It's not working anymore. It's strangling the environment, and that is something we can't afford. Our tourism product is powerful, and with very little effort, it has made its way into one of the most highly regarded tourism product offerings in terms of festival culture in the world. People look to Trinidad and Tobago as the experts when it comes to festival. And so we've got to find a way to make our policy and legislation align with that perception of what we do around the world. The thing about events planning and the work that you all do, it's people-based, it's people-centered. And you correct me if I'm wrong, you're depending on people to support your events. And we live in a climate now where in this post-COVID period, everybody's watching their pockets and everybody wants to get value for money and want to get the best product that money can buy. What are some of the imperatives that are on your organization in this post-COVID period? Because this will be the first full carnival season or events moving forward that you'll be able to host in 2 years or within the last 2 years. What are some of the initiatives that you have on board in order to wean the public back into coming out and socializing and attending events? So I don't know that we have necessarily to have initiatives to wean the public back. What we are doing at the moment is we are examining the prevailing climate. People have expressed clearly their desire to do things that don't require them being locked up behind their doors and behind masks. People have made their desires very clear. So, what we are focused on now as an association is providing quality events. That's what's key. The quality of the events is key so that when people see what we are offering, they want to spend their money. We already have a situation where for next year carnival, there is almost no accommodation available in Port of Spain, Trinidad, at this time. And that was the case since Ash Wednesday of this year. People have already made their choice about what they want. We just now have to make sure that we deliver on the promise that Trinidad and Tobago is the best possible place to be during the carnival period next year. That's where we're focused right now.
Allow me to ask this question and guide me accordingly. A lot of the events that are being promoted over the years, we can sit here and we can actually handpick the events and the places that it will be hosted. Are you all in the habit, or is it within your foresight to try to begin to host events or develop venues rather than use the contemporary venues that we know? The venue, and I'm referring about developing venues in different communities in different areas of Trinidad.
So that is something that is always on the mind of an event producer, because again, when you think of quality and you think of what the product is, uniqueness and innovation is at the heart of what you do. So a big part of that is going to be, where is this event being held? People want variety, so they want to see things in different places. So that's always the desire, but it's not quite so easy to do it because there are significant costs attached to building an event venue from scratch. And that is something that is always a challenge. You have to consider where people park. You have to consider how they get to where they're going. How far is it from transportation hubs? Will service providers be able to get in and out quickly? There are all kinds of things, all kinds of risks that you have to consider when choosing a venue for an event. You have to consider your audience and so on and so forth. And so those are challenges that are there. But yes, you always want to have somewhere new to have a fete or to do your event, because you want people to feel as though you are innovating because they're paying you to innovate. There are some brands that attach significance to continuity and consistency, and those brands will continue to be in the same places, but there are others that don't have that same kind of brand value. So, those are things that the practitioners, the professionals, the creators look at, and they assess on the basis of their efficacy and their ability to make it work, because sometimes it just can't work. You want to, but it can't work for all kinds of reasons.
Allow me to ask this question, and you could put me in my place if it is I'm out of line.
You sure about that, Mr.?
I have no issue with that. Very often you hear that an artist charge, and I don't want to call names, charge $450,000 to perform, $250,000 to perform. You might hear another artist charge $85,000 to perform. Does your organization, the Promoters Association of Trinidad and Tobago, have any say in determining or negotiating or standardizing the cost that an artist values himself at? Because sometimes an artist may simply, he thinks of himself in such an elite way, or maybe he has developed such an elite brand that he commands that sort of pricing. But in reality, when you have different colleges trying to host an event to promote the well-being of their school, and the money is being used clearly to redevelop their institution, an educational institution, they can't cope with the overhead, so they simply say, we can't afford this kind of artist. We have to settle for something a little more medium, a little more junior, senior kind of thing, not senior artists. What sort of traction you all have in negotiating with these artists and letting them know, listen, you all need to recognize that everybody has to live in this industry. and you're simply your costing is astronomical. It's outrageous. What sort of input you all have in terms of price determination? That is my question.
The association doesn't have any input whatsoever in terms of how another artist, practitioner, performer charges. That's not something that we would ever get into, because artists are artists, creatives are creatives, and they charge based on what they believe their work is valued at. What I will say, though, is that in a business, the market decides if you can command it or if you can't. And that's just as simple as it is.
Well, I appreciate the time that you've taken to share your experience with us. We appreciate all that you've said, and I'm sure that the listening public out there is better off for it. I wish you well in the trust moving forward and in the season ahead. We look forward to your presence with us on other occasions, and feel free to remain in touch with us, as we will remain in touch with you.
Thank you sincerely for the time that you've given to the Promoters Association this afternoon to ventilate its concerns. We continue to want the best for Trinidad and Tobago and for the entrepreneurs in our association, because business is very important, especially now where we have challenges. We need to get everybody back to work, and this is what we are primarily engaged in the business of ensuring. So thank you so much. And of course, thank you so much to all of your listeners on Power 102 FM.
And thank you so very much, Paige. And thank you, Fareed. Beautiful interview.
Thanks much, David. I think it was enlightening for both of us and the public.
Yes, it was.
Is that it for the day, or we moving forward?
No, that's it for today. We go to the 6 these days.
Right. So enjoy the rest of the evening and be safe on your way home.